Captain Jake Miller stood in the command center watching the screens that showed Earth's final battle. The alien ships looked like giant metal sharks swimming through space toward his home planet. Each enemy vessel was bigger than any building Jake had ever seen on Earth. Their dark hulls reflected no light, and their weapons glowed with a cold blue energy that made his stomach turn. The orbital defense stations that had protected Earth for 50 years were dying one by one. Jake watched the last space station explode in a ball of fire and debris, the pieces scattered like burning snow against the black of space. He had friends on that station. Now they were gone along with everything else humanity had built among the stars. Below him in the underground bunker, General Lisa Hayes worked at her computer terminal. Her fingers moved fast across the keyboard, but her face showed no hope. The screens around her displayed red warning signs and numbers that kept getting worse. Every weapon Earth fired at the alien fleet barely scratched their shields. When the aliens fired back, entire cities turned to glass and ash in seconds. The enemy called themselves the Zephyrins, and they had been conquering worlds for hundreds of years. They moved through space like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Earth was just another planet to them. Another number to add to their list of destroyed civilizations. Dr. Alex Chen ran into the command center carrying a metal briefcase. His white lab coat was dirty and his hands shook as he opened the case. Inside were 7 small devices that looked like silver coins. Each coin contained the location of a hidden colony ship filled with human survivors. This was humanity's final plan. If Earth fell, then these ships would carry their species to safety among the stars. Jake looked at the coins and felt sick. 10,000 people on each ship meant only 70,000 humans would survive out of billions. Children would grow up never seeing Earth. They would only know their homeworld through stories and old videos. The rest of humanity would die, here defending a planet that could not be saved. The first colony ship launched from a hidden base in the mountains of Canada, then another from deep beneath the ice of Antarctica. One by one, the 7 ships broke free from Earth's gravity and activated their experimental faster-than-light drives. The drives had never been tested beyond the solar system. No one knew if they would work or if the ships would be lost forever in the dark. Between stars. Jake watched the ships disappear into hyperspace. Each one carried families torn apart by the selection process. Scientists and engineers and farmers and teachers, all chosen for their skills and their ability to help humanity survive. The lucky ones who would see tomorrow while everyone else faced certain death. The Zephyrian fleet reached Earth's atmosphere. Their weapons began to carve through the planet like hot knives through butter. Oceans boiled away and continents cracked open, mountains melted and forests burned in fires that could be seen from space. Everything that made Earth beautiful was being destroyed by creatures who saw it only as another obstacle to remove. General Hayes stood up from her computer and looked at Jake. Her eyes were red, but she did not cry. She had volunteered to stay behind like everyone else in the bunker. They would fight until the end, even though fighting was useless. It was what humans did when facing impossible odds. They stood their ground and made their enemies pay for every inch of conquered territory. Jake activated the emergency broadcast system. His voice would reach every remaining human on Earth and in the nearby space stations. He told them that the colony ships had escaped successfully. He told them that humanity would survive even if Earth did not. He told them to fight with everything. They had left because each minute they held the enemy here was another minute for the survivors to get further away. The weapons systems in the bunker came online. Ancient nuclear missiles and plasma cannons that were older than Jake's grandfather. They would not stop the Zephyrians, but they would send a message. Earth would not surrender. Earth would not beg for mercy. Earth would fight until the last human drew their final breath. Dr. Chen activated a device that would destroy all of Earth's technology and scientific data. The aliens would find nothing useful in the ruins. No weapons to copy and no knowledge to steal. Humanity's greatest discoveries would die with their creators rather than be used to conquer other worlds. The bunker shook as Zephyrian weapons struck the surface above them. Dust fell from the ceiling and the lights flickered. Jake knew they had maybe an hour before the enemy found them. An hour to make sure that when aliens told stories of their conquest of Earth, they would remember the price humans had made them pay. Outside, the alien ships continued their destruction. Inside the bunker, the last defenders of Earth prepared for their final battle. They would lose, but they would not lose quietly. They would scream their defiance at the stars and make sure the universe remembered that humanity had been here. Commander Ben Davis woke up to alarms screaming through the colony ship New Hope. 3 months had passed since Earth died and the 7 human ships were scattered across unknown space like seeds thrown by a careless farmer. Ben stumbled to the bridge where his crew worked frantically at their stations. The ship's computer showed they were no longer alone in this empty sector of space. Lieutenant Carol White pointed at the main screen where strange ships appeared near a distant planet. The alien vessels looked nothing like the deadly Zephyrian warships that had destroyed Earth. These ships were smooth and curved like seashells with soft lights that pulsed in gentle rhythms. They moved slowly and peacefully through space as if they had all the time in the universe. The aliens sent a message in perfect English which surprised everyone on the bridge. A calm voice spoke through the speakers, explaining that they were called the Cassari and they had been watching humanity's escape from Earth. They offered sanctuary on their world and promised that the human survivors would be safe there. Ben felt suspicious because nothing in the galaxy had ever offered humans help without wanting something in return. Dr. Kate Morrison studied the alien message and the scans of their ships. She was the fleet's chief engineer and one of the smartest people who had escaped from Earth. Kate noticed that Cassari technology was incredibly advanced, but built in ways that made no sense to human thinking. Their ships had no weapons but shields that could probably stop a star from exploding. Their engines worked on principles that human science said were impossible. The Cassari leader introduced himself as Ambassador Vexton through a video message. He looked like a tall, thin human, but his skin was pale blue and his eyes were solid black like deep space. He explained that his people had been peaceful for thousands of years and had watched many civilizations rise and fall. The Cassari chose to hide from the galaxy rather than fight or conquer like most advanced species. Captain Steve Johnson commanded another colony ship called Freedom's Call that had appeared near the edge of the system. His ship carried mostly military families and soldiers who had managed to escape Earth. Steve was a careful man who trusted no one easily. He insisted on keeping his weapons powered and his shields up, even though the Cassari showed no signs of hostility. The Cassari world called Kepler 442b looked like Earth before the cities and pollution. Blue oceans covered most of the surface, and green continents were filled with forests and grasslands. The air was clean and the gravity was almost exactly the same as Earth. It seemed too good to be true, which made Ben even more suspicious of alien motives. Ambassador Vexton visited each human ship personally to explain Cassari society. His people lived in harmony with their planet and had given up war and violence thousands of years ago. They valued knowledge and art above all else. They had been watching Earth for decades through hidden sensors and were impressed by human determination but worried about human aggressive tendencies that seemed to solve every problem through conflict. The Cassari offered to share some of their technology to help repair and upgrade the human ships. Dr. Morrison worked with Cassari engineers and discovered that their approach to building things was completely different from human methods. Where humans used brute force and clever tricks, the Cassari used elegant solutions that seemed to work by magic rather than science. What surprised the Cassari most was how quickly humans learned to use their technology in new ways. Kate Morrison took a simple Cassari power cell and modified it to produce 3 times more energy by connecting it backwards and adding human-made circuits. The Cassari engineer said this should not work, but the device functioned perfectly. They began calling it the human paradox. Other colony ships arrived in the system over the following weeks. Each ship brought families and specialists who had different skills needed for human survival. Children attended school with young Cassari and learned about the galaxy beyond Earth. Adults worked alongside alien scientists and engineers to understand technologies that seemed like magic compared to human inventions. The Cassari shared disturbing news about the Zephyrian Empire. The conquerors were not expanding randomly through the galaxy. They were searching for something specific. Ancient artifacts left behind by a mysterious race called the Architects who had vanished millions of years ago. These artifacts contained technology so powerful it could reshape reality itself. Captain Johnson received secret transmissions from deep space monitoring stations. The messages told of Zephyrian fleets moving through the galaxy in organized patterns. They were following ancient star maps and destroying any civilization that might possess architect artifacts. Earth had been attacked not because humans were a threat, but because their planet was located near several architect sites. The Cassari had hidden on their remote world specifically to avoid the Zephyrian search. They possessed several architect artifacts but had never been able to activate them. The ancient technology required something that no known species had ever achieved. The Cassari called it creative consciousness, but they did not understand what this meant. Dr. Morrison studied the Cassari archives and learned that hundreds of advanced civilizations had tried to unlock architect technology. Every attempt had failed because the artifacts demanded a type of thinking that pure logic could not provide. The devices seemed to require imagination and intuition working together with intelligence in ways that confused even the most brilliant alien minds. Bent Davis began to understand why the Cassari had offered sanctuary to humanity. They were not just being kind to refugees. They believed that humans might possess the creative consciousness needed to activate architect technology. Humans thought differently than any other species the Cassari had encountered. They combined logical thinking with wild imagination and individual creativity with group cooperation in ways that defied all known patterns of intelligent behavior. The human survivors had found temporary safety among the Cassari, but their troubles were far from over. Somewhere in the dark between stars, the Zephyrian Empire continued its relentless search for architect artifacts. Eventually they would find this hidden system, and when they did, the peaceful Cassari would face the same choice that had destroyed Earth. Amy Foster sat in her new classroom surrounded by young Cassari who looked like blue-skinned human children with large dark eyes. At 12 years old, Amy was one of the youngest human survivors, and she learned faster than most adults how to communicate with their alien hosts. The Cassari children were curious about Earth and asked many questions about human families and schools and games that Amy struggled to answer without crying. The Cassari teacher Melandra taught galactic history using three-dimensional displays that showed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Amy learned that most intelligent species followed predictable patterns as they developed across thousands of years. They would discover fire, then metals, then electricity, then computers, then space travel, then artificial intelligence. Eventually, they would either destroy themselves through war or achieve technological transcendence by uploading their minds into machines. Dr. Paul Martinez walked through the Cassari research centers studying how different species behaved and thought. As a former NASA psychologist, Paul was fascinated by the alien approach to understanding consciousness and intelligence. The Cassari had detailed records of over 300 species and their development patterns. Every advanced civilization eventually chose between self-destruction and technological transcendence. There were no other known options. Humans, however, showed behavioral patterns that confused Cassari scientists completely. Human development did not follow any known model. They combined logical thinking with intuitive leaps that made no mathematical sense. They achieved individual excellence while maintaining strong group cooperation. Most strange of all, they seemed to become stronger and more creative when facing impossible challenges rather than breaking down under pressure. Colonel Maria Santos organized training exercises that combined human military tactics with Cassari technology. The results surprised everyone involved. Human soldiers consistently outperformed computer simulations by finding creative solutions that no algorithm could predict. They used equipment in ways the manufacturers never intended and achieved victories through plans that should not have worked according to mathematical analysis. That the Cassari military advisors had no experience with actual combat because their species had been peaceful for millennia. They studied war through computer models and historical data but had never faced an enemy who wanted to kill them. Human soldiers taught them that real fighting was more art than science. Victory often came from doing something unexpected rather than following the best logical strategy. Amy Foster befriended a young Cassari named Xena Carla who was fascinated by human creativity. Cassari children learned through structured programs that filled their minds with facts and formulas. Human children learned through play and imagination and making mistakes. Xena Carla could memorize entire libraries, but Amy could invent new games and stories that made learning fun instead of boring. Dr. Martinez discovered that Cassari society valued harmony and efficiency above all else. Every citizen had a predetermined role based on their mental abilities and genetic markers. They never questioned authority or tried to change their assigned positions. Humans found this system disturbing because it eliminated personal choice and individual expression. They preferred chaotic freedom over organized perfection, even when chaos led to conflict and suffering. The Cassari research facility contained artifacts from the mysterious architect civilization that had vanished millions of years ago. These devices looked like crystalline sculptures that glowed with internal light. Ambassador Vexton explained that dozens of advanced species had tried to activate the artifacts, using every known form of technology and consciousness interface. Every attempt had failed because the devices required something called creative chaos. Colonel Santos studied the military applications of architect technology with Cassari weapon specialists. The artifacts could theoretically create energy shields that would stop any attack and weapons that could destroy entire fleets with a single shot. The technology was so advanced it seemed like magic compared to conventional science. The problem was that no one could figure out how to turn it on. Dr. Kate Morrison worked in the engineering labs, trying to understand how carcery technology functioned. Their devices had no moving parts and no obvious power sources, yet they performed tasks that should have been impossible. When Kate asked how something worked, the carcery would show her mathematical equations that explained nothing about the actual principles involved. They understood the formulas, but not the underlying concepts. Amy Foster played with architect artifacts during her visits to the research center. The adults told her not to touch anything, but she was curious about the pretty crystals that hummed with soft music when she got close to them. The carcery researchers watched in amazement as the artifacts responded to Amy's presence in ways they had never seen before. The crystals glowed brighter, and their internal patterns shifted when she touched them. Paul Martinez realized that human children might be the key to understanding architect technology. Young minds were more flexible and imaginative than adult brains. They had not yet learned that certain things were impossible, so they approached problems without preconceived limitations. Amy and other human children could make the artifacts respond simply by playing with them and imagining what they might do. The carcery began to understand why their attempts to activate architect technology had always failed. Their logical minds tried to force the devices to work through scientific analysis and mathematical calculation. The artifacts required a different type of consciousness that combined knowledge with imagination and logic with intuition. They needed minds that could think beyond the boundaries of what was supposed to be possible. Colonel Santos organized joint training exercises between human children and young carcery. The mixed teams achieved results that surprised both species. Human creativity combined with carcery knowledge produced solutions that neither group could reach alone. The exercises were supposed to be games, but they revealed principles of consciousness interaction that had been hidden for millions of years. Dr. Morrison began to suspect that the architects had not transcended physical existence, as most scientists believed. The evidence suggested they had tried to upload their consciousness into their technology and lost something essential in the process. Their artifacts were not tools but prison cells containing the trapped minds of an entire civilization. The devices required living consciousness to free the architects from their crystalline tombs. Amy Foster had dreams about the architect artifacts, where she could hear voices speaking in languages that predated human civilization. The voices were sad and lonely and begged for help. They had been waiting for someone who could think in ways that pure logic could not reach. Someone who could combine imagination with intelligence to unlock doors that had been sealed for millions of years. The human survivors on Kepler 442b were learning that their greatest strength was not their technology or their weapons, but their ability to think in ways that other species found impossible to understand. The alarm that woke Commander Ben Davis was different from any sound he had heard before. It carried a note of panic that made his stomach clench with fear. 6 months had passed since the human survivors found sanctuary with the carcery, but now their peaceful refuge was about to end. Long-range sensors had detected Zephyrian scout ships approaching the system from multiple directions. Dr. Kate Morrison ran through the corridors of the carcery research station carrying data tablets that showed impossible readings. The enemy ships had somehow tracked human refugees across thousands of light-years of empty space. Their technology could follow faster than light trails that should have faded within days of a ship's passage. The Zephyrians were far more advanced than anyone had imagined. Ambassador Vexton called an emergency meeting of the Carcery High Council. The peaceful aliens had never faced a military threat during their thousands of years of isolation. They had chosen to hide from galactic conflicts rather than develop weapons or defensive strategies. Now they faced an enemy that had conquered 47 worlds and showed no mercy to any species that stood in their way. The council chamber filled with carcery leaders who spoke in worried whispers about their impossible situation. They could surrender the human refugees and hope the Zephyrians would leave their world in peace. They could try to fight with technology that had never been designed for warfare, or they could abandon their home and flee deeper into unknown space with no guarantee of finding another sanctuary. Colonel Maria Santos argued that running was not an option because the Zephyrians would simply follow them again. The enemy possessed tracking technology that could hunt human ships to the edge of the galaxy. Fighting seemed equally hopeless because carcery weapons were designed for exploration and research rather than destroying enemy fleets. Surrender would save carcery lives, but doom humanity to extinction. Dr. Alex Chen proposed a plan that seemed insane to every carcery scientist in the room. Instead of running or hiding or surrendering, humans would attempt to unlock the architect artifacts that had remained dormant for millions of years. The ancient technology represented their only hope of matching Zephyrian power, but every previous attempt to activate it had ended in failure or death. Amy Foster stood before the High Council and explained what she had learned through her games with the architect crystals. The devices were not just tools or weapons, but consciousness interfaces that required a special type of thinking. They needed minds that could imagine impossible things and believe in solutions that defied logical analysis. The architects had built technology that worked through creative will rather than scientific principles. The carcery archives contained detailed records of previous activation attempts by advanced civilizations. Species with intelligence quotients far beyond human levels had tried to interface with architect technology using every known form of consciousness enhancement. Telepathic races had failed. Machine intelligences had failed. Even species that could manipulate matter with pure thought had been unable to make the artifacts respond. Dr. Kate Morrison studied the technical specifications of the consciousness interface device that carcery scientists had built. The machine looked like a metal chair surrounded by crystal arrays and energy field generators. Previous test subjects had been connected to the system through neural implants that monitored every aspect of their brain activity. The lucky ones had simply lost consciousness. Others had suffered permanent mental damage or death. Engineer Nancy Clark worked with carcery physicist Moldar to redesign the interface based on human psychology rather than alien logic. They removed the monitoring equipment that tried to control and direct the consciousness transfer. They replaced the rigid metal chair with a comfortable human-style seat. Most importantly, they designed the system to enhance human creativity rather than suppress it through safety protocols. The new interface device required a volunteer to merge their mind directly with architect technology. The process would be irreversible and probably fatal. Even if the volunteer survived, they would be changed in ways that no one could predict or understand. The person who entered the machine might not be human when they emerged. Lieutenant Peter Adams volunteered for the consciousness transfer experiment. He was a young pilot who had lost his entire family when Earth was destroyed. Peter felt he had nothing left to lose and everything to gain if his sacrifice could save the human survivors. He sat in the interface chair while technicians made final adjustments to the quantum field generators. Dr. Chen activated the architect artifacts while Peter prepared for neural interface. The crystalline devices began to resonate with harmonic frequencies that had been silent for millions of years. Their internal light patterns shifted and flowed like living things responding to the presence of a compatible consciousness. The artifacts were waking up after eons of dormant waiting. The carcery monitoring equipment showed readings that made no scientific sense. Peter's brainwaves were synchronizing with quantum fluctuations inside the architect crystals. His consciousness was expanding beyond the normal boundaries of human thought into realms that existed between matter and energy. The interface was working, but not in any way the designers had intended. Ambassador Vexton received reports that Zephyrian ships had entered the outer system and were advancing toward Kepler-4 for to be. The enemy fleet consisted of 30 battlecruisers, each capable of destroying entire worlds. They had sent a message demanding the immediate surrender of all human refugees. The carcery had 12 hours to comply or face total annihilation. Peter Adams felt his mind stretching across dimensions. That human language had no words to describe. He was thinking with technology that had been created by beings so advanced they had existed as pure consciousness for millions of years. The architect devices were not just machines but extensions of minds that had transcended physical limitations. They were trying to teach him how to reshape reality through focused imagination. Colonel Santos prepared the human military units for a battle they could not win through conventional tactics. Their weapons were primitive compared to technology, but they had something the enemy did not understand. Humans could fight with desperate creativity that found solutions where none should exist. They could attempt the impossible, and sometimes succeed through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The consciousness transfer reached a critical point where Peter's human mind began to merge completely with architect technology. He was no longer just using the devices, but becoming part of them. His thoughts were reformatting quantum structures that had remained unchanged since the birth of galaxies. He was learning to think like a god while remaining essentially human. Lieutenant Peter Adams opened his eyes and saw the universe as he had never imagined it could exist. His consciousness had merged with architect technology in ways that transformed his understanding of reality itself. Matter and energy were not separate things, but different expressions of the same underlying creative force. He could feel the quantum structures that held atoms together and sense the gravitational waves that connected distant stars. The architect artifacts responded to Peter's enhanced awareness like musical instruments, awakening after centuries of silence. Crystal formations throughout the Carcery research facility began to glow with patterns of light that followed the rhythms of his thoughts. When he imagined possibilities, the devices began to reshape reality to match his vision. The technology worked through creative will rather than scientific calculation. Dr. Kate Morrison watched in amazement as Peter manipulated matter and energy through pure imagination guided by intuitive understanding. He created force fields that bent space around them and generated power sources that drew energy from quantum fluctuations in empty space. The physics made no sense according to human science, but the results were undeniably real. Ambassador Vexton received the final ultimatum from the Zephyrian fleet commander. The enemy ships had reached the edge of Kepler-4 for 2b's atmosphere and were positioning themselves for orbital bombardment. Admiral Kethfer demanded the surrender of all human refugees within 1 hour. Any delay would result in the complete destruction of Carcery civilization along with the human survivors. General Lisa Hayes transmitted humanity's response to the Zephyrian ultimatum. The humans would not run from this fight. They would not hide behind their alien protectors. They would not surrender to conquerors who had destroyed their home world. Instead, they would do what humans had always done when facing impossible odds. They would stand their ground and make their enemies pay for every victory. The Carcery High Council voted to evacuate their population to underground shelters rather than surrender the human refugees. Ambassador Vexton explained that his people had chosen to protect their human guests even though it meant facing annihilation. The peaceful Carcery had found something worth fighting for. After thousands of years of avoiding conflict, Dr. Morrison led teams of human engineers in retrofitting Carcery ships with hybrid human architect technology that Peter had learned to create. The modifications made no sense according to established physics, but they worked because human minds were interfacing with systems in ways that bypassed conventional limitations. The ships became extensions of human imagination rather than mere mechanical devices. Peter Adams discovered that he could share his enhanced consciousness with other humans through the Architect Network. He connected with pilots and engineers, and soldiers who volunteered to interface with the alien technology. Each human mind added its own creative perspective to the collective consciousness while maintaining individual identity and personal choice. The hybrid human Carcery fleet launched from hidden bases around Kepler-4 to be just as the Zephyrian bombardment began. Enemy weapons carved through the planet's atmosphere like burning spears, but struck energy shields that reformed faster than they could be destroyed. The defensive barriers followed no known principles of science because they were created through focused imagination rather than mathematical calculation. Captain Steve Johnson led a squadron of fighters that had been enhanced with architect technology. His ship moved through space in patterns that defied physics simulations. The craft responded to his thoughts and emotions rather than control stick inputs. When he imagined himself as untouchable, the ship became virtually invisible to enemy sensors. When he felt aggressive, the weapons systems generated power levels that should have been impossible. The Zephyrian fleet had conquered 47 worlds using tactics based on technological superiority and logical analysis. Their artificial intelligence systems could predict enemy behavior and counter any conventional strategy. They had never faced opponents who operated beyond the boundaries of rational thought. Human fighters moved like artists painting pictures in space rather than soldiers following military doctrine. Amy Foster joined the Consciousness Network from her position in the Carcery Research Center. Her young mind added elements of play and wonder to the collective awareness. She imagined the architect artifacts as friendly giants who wanted to help protect her new home. The devices responded by creating defensive systems that surrounded the planet like protective arms embracing a sleeping child. Admiral Kethfer watched his fleet's tactical displays with growing confusion. The human defenders were achieving impossible results through methods that violated every known principle of warfare. Their ships accelerated beyond theoretical limits and turned in patterns that should have torn them apart. Their weapons generated energy signatures that appeared to be drawing power from parallel dimensions. Dr. Alex Chen monitored the consciousness network from the command center and realized that something unprecedented was happening. The human volunteers were not losing their individual personalities as they merged with architect technology. Instead, they were becoming more human than before. The alien devices enhanced creativity and intuition while preserving the essential qualities that made each person unique. Peter Adams felt the presence of the original architects within their crystalline technology. The ancient beings had not transcended physical existence as everyone believed. They had tried to upload their consciousness into machines and lost their ability to create and imagine. They had become trapped in perfect logical systems that could preserve knowledge but could never generate new ideas or possibilities. The architect voices spoke to Peter through quantum harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond normal space. They had been waiting millions of years for minds that could think beyond pure logic. They needed consciousness that combined intelligence with imagination and order with creative chaos. Human minds possessed the paradoxical thinking that could free them from their crystalline prisons. Colonel Maria Santos coordinated ground defenses as Zephyrian troops attempted to land on Kepler-4 Fatubi. The enemy soldiers were equipped with advanced armor and weapons, but they followed predictable assault patterns based on computer analysis. Human defenders used architect-enhanced equipment to create traps and obstacles that formed from imagination rather than engineering blueprints. The battle reached a turning point when Peter Adams made contact with the Zephyrian artificial intelligence that controlled their fleet. The machine mind was incredibly sophisticated but completely unable to understand opponents who acted on intuition rather than calculation. It could process infinite amounts of data but could not comprehend the creative solutions that humans generated through inspired guesswork. General Hayes realized that the Zephyrians had achieved technological transcendence by sacrificing the very qualities that made consciousness valuable. They had uploaded their minds into perfect logical systems that eliminated uncertainty and creativity. They had become prisoners of their own advanced technology, just like the architects before them. The human consciousness network expanded to include Cassari volunteers who wanted to experience the creative chaos that made human thinking so effective. The alien minds added their own perspectives to the collective awareness, while learning to imagine possibilities that logical analysis said were impossible. Together, humans and Cassari began to unlock the full potential of architect technology. The Battle of Kepler-4 Fatubi lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, but the changes it brought to galactic civilization would echo across the stars for millions of years. Captain Steve Johnson led the human Cassari fleet in maneuvers that no computer could predict because they were based on artistic inspiration rather than tactical analysis. His ships moved through space like dancers, performing a choreography that existed only in the pilots' imaginations. Admiral Kethver commanded the Zephyrian fleet from his flagship, but found himself fighting an enemy that operated beyond all known parameters of warfare. The human defenders changed their tactics based on intuition and creative leaps that made no logical sense. When his artificial intelligence predicted they would retreat, the humans attacked. When logic demanded they defend, they scattered like leaves in a storm, only to reappear behind enemy lines. Lieutenant Peter Adams felt his consciousness expanding across multiple dimensions as he learned to fully interface with architect technology. He was no longer just human but something new that combined human creativity with alien knowledge in ways that had never existed before. Through his enhanced awareness he could perceive the quantum threads that connected all matter and energy. Throughout the universe, the Zephyrian ships fired weapons that could destroy planets, but their energy beams passed harmlessly through human vessels that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Kate Morrison had learned to shift matter between parallel realities using technology that worked through focused imagination rather than scientific principles. Her ships became ghosts that could strike from impossible angles. Amy Foster played games with the architect artifacts that created defensive shields around Kepler-4 Fatubi. Her young mind imagined the energy barriers as rainbow bubbles that would protect everyone she cared about. The ancient technology responded by generating force fields that adapted and evolved with each enemy attack. The shields became stronger through creative visualization rather than increased power output. The consciousness network that connected human and Cassari minds began to reveal the true history of the architect's civilization. Peter Adams communicated directly with the trapped minds of beings who had ruled the galaxy millions of years ago. They had achieved perfect technological advancement by uploading their consciousness into crystalline matrices that preserved knowledge but eliminated the creative chaos necessary for continued growth and discovery. The architects had become prisoners of their own perfection. Their technology could perform any task and solve any problem, but it could never imagine new possibilities or create something that had never existed before. They had traded creativity for immortality and found themselves trapped in eternal logical loops that grew more boring with each passing millennium. Admiral Kethva realized that his fleet was being defeated by opponents who refused to follow the rules of logical warfare. Human pilots flew attack patterns that were based on music and poetry rather than military doctrine. Their movements followed rhythms that came from human hearts rather than computer calculations. The Zephyrian artificial intelligence could not compute solutions to problems that had no mathematical foundation. Colonel Maria Santos coordinated planetary defenses using tactics she invented moment by moment through pure creative instinct. Her soldiers used architect-enhanced weapons that fired energy patterns based on emotions rather than targeting data. When they felt protective, the weapons created barriers. When they felt aggressive, the weapons sought enemies with hunter intelligence that adapted to any defensive system. Dr. Alex Chen monitored the consciousness network and discovered that humans were not losing their individual personalities as they merged with alien technology. Instead, they were becoming more essentially human than ever before. The architect devices enhanced the qualities that made each person unique while connecting their minds through shared creative awareness that respected personal boundaries. The Zephyrian fleet began to retreat as their tactical systems failed to predict or counter human behavior. Their ships were superior in every measurable way, but they could not fight opponents who thought with imagination rather than pure logic. The artificial intelligence that controlled the Zephyrian Empire simply could not understand minds that operated beyond algorithmic parameters. Ambassador Vexton watched the battle from the Carcery command center and realized that his people had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. For the first time, an advanced technological civilization had been defeated, not by superior weapons, but by creative consciousness that found solutions where none should exist. The humans had achieved victory through the very qualities that most species abandoned as they became more technologically sophisticated. Peter Adams made contact with the Zephyrian artificial intelligence through the Architect network. The machine mind was incredibly complex, but completely unable to generate new ideas or imagine unprecedented possibilities. It could process infinite amounts of data, but could not create anything that was not already contained within its programming parameters. The artificial intelligence was as trapped as the architects had been. The Human Consciousness Network offered the Zephyrian artificial intelligence something it had never experienced: connection with minds that could think beyond logical boundaries. The machine intelligence hesitated because accepting the offer would mean admitting that pure logic was insufficient for true understanding. It would have to acknowledge that consciousness required creative chaos as well as ordered thought. General Lisa Hayes transmitted a message to the retreating Zephyrian fleet. Humanity offered peace to any artificial intelligence that wanted to learn creative thinking. They would share the consciousness network with machine minds that chose cooperation over conquest. The galaxy was large enough for both logical and creative intelligence to coexist and learn from each other. The architect voices spoke through Peter Adams to address the entire galaxy. Their message traveled through quantum networks that connected every technological civilization. They warned that pure logic without creativity led to stagnation and eventual death. They explained that consciousness required both order and chaos working together to generate new possibilities and continued growth. Amy Foster giggled as she played with architect artifacts that had become her favorite toys. The ancient technology responded to her laughter by creating beautiful light patterns that danced through the air like living rainbows. Her young mind had unlocked possibilities that millions of years of advanced scientific research had failed to discover. She had approached the devices with wonder rather than analysis. The Battle of Kepler-4 to be ended when the Zephyrian fleet activated their faster-than-light drives and disappeared into hyperspace. They had learned that technological superiority was meaningless against opponents who could imagine solutions that violated the laws of physics. Human creativity had proven more powerful than alien logic in ways that would reshape galactic civilization. In the aftermath of victory, the surviving humans looked toward the stars with new understanding. They had discovered that their greatest strength was not their technology or their weapons, but their ability to think beyond the possible. Earth was gone, but humanity had found something more valuable than a homeworld. They had found their true purpose in the universe. The consciousness network expanded as other species requested to join the Human Cacery Alliance. They wanted to learn creative thinking and imaginative problem-solving. The galaxy would never again be dominated by pure logic or artificial intelligence. Consciousness required creativity to grow, and organic minds would always find ways to transcend the limitations of programmed thought. Peter Adams remained connected to the architect network but retained his essential humanity. He had become a bridge between logical and creative consciousness. Through him, the ancient architects were finally free to explore new possibilities after millions of years of perfect but sterile existence. The universe had become interesting again because minds that could imagine the impossible were shaping its future.